Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Innovator Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Williams. And in this week's episode, I was joined by Rei Paki. Rei is currently the host of the Changeable Podcast, which I highly recommend, and is also Chief Operating Officer of Hello Human. He is a strategic designer and change provocateur who is absolutely passionate about employing the best of humanity to solve hard problems. His experience spans many disciplines, including management consulting, as well as leadership roles in product and design, and includes industries that range from media and advertising through to health and financial services. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with this week's Ops Innovator, Rei Paki. Hi, Rei. Welcome to the Ops Innovator Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to talk about doing design right and what that might mean in terms of applying an innovative lens to how you might actually pull something like that off. I know, my first exposure to what is now my favorite operational tool, Service Blueprints, came from you, right? I just remember shadowing you and learning how to do that stuff and how to use them well. So I'd love if you could share with me and the rest of the audience just how you went from your early career to where you are now and your focus on design and doing good design, and what that process and journey was like for you.
Well, I think just to start off, I feel like I'm really a problem solver at heart, and that has always been part of how I look at everything, with a very creative bent, I would say. So I started with a marketing degree, and I ended up getting a master's in interactive media. Learned a lot of things around design through both degrees. Funnily enough, got connected up to something called the internet back in 1994, which was pretty much when only universities had it. Learned a little bit about web design at that point in time, but it kind of was mainly around desktop publishing, which is kind of where most of the accessibility for design was coming into digital products, certainly at that point. And I kind of fell into this world where technology and people meet, and was really working in what we now call UX. Before, people were calling it UX design. So doing user experience work in and around business. So, and that would largely be in a technology space. So websites, different tools like that, when mobile devices suddenly became something that had that capability of really delivering content. So thinking the iPhone, sort of 2007, 2008 period, we really saw an explosion in things like apps and that sort of thing. So that, I think, is largely when people became familiar with what user experience design is now. And what I found over the time, not just from then, but even now, is that regardless of what I'm working on and regardless of, I guess, the problems that need to be solved in that particular space, I always have found that there is a bigger problem. And I guess the way I've come to the point that I'm at, and I suppose it's the path that I continue to follow, is that there is always a bigger problem. And that's a constant realization for me that the more elevated your ability to become, to your ability to solve problems elevates, you actually find that there's a bigger problem behind that again. So, for me, I would call myself a strategic designer. So I focus on problems and enable people with technology. I'm also a COO of a design company called Hello Human.
Yeah.
And we might get back to that. But the biggest thing is that there are always bigger problems. But one of the key areas of how to solve those things is to use a human focus lens. And even now, there's a lot of opportunity to use that approach to create something that really changes how things work and the results that you get from them.
You said something that just sort of made me laugh, at least in my head. You say you call yourself a designer, because been trying to learn and apply design sort of techniques in my work as I could, but I always preface it with, usually in any room, it's like, but I'm not a designer, right? Just to sort of give myself an out. But is there a little bit of design in the Lean Six Sigma lady who's designing a process? Is there a little bit of designer in the HR person who's doing people policies? Is there a little bit of designer that people can draw on and sort of temporarily take on that title for a little while as they go about their work?
Yeah, absolutely. And now you're making me laugh in my head. And I've thought this for a while, and this is my own personal opinion, so I don't want to be attacked for it, but I see a very clear distinction between what we would define as art and what we would define as design. And just to explain that a little bit, so they cross over, no doubt. But I think when we think of design, we're actually thinking more about the artful aspects of that. So we're thinking about form and color and, position and all of the design principles around how to compose things, whether that's visual design or interior design or any of those types of disciplines. But art and design are very different, and they have a very different focus. And to me, again, this is my opinion, art is about the artist, and art generally is about the expression of that artist to put out into the world. Design, on the other hand, can be that, but it also has a very different focus, and that focus isn't internal to the artist. It's external to, I'll call, the user or the customer.
Okay.
So to me, design is about the other. It's about not the designer, but the person you're designing for. And that's, to me, the large distinction between design and art, in that design can be done by anyone, and it usually is done by people who are focused on someone else or something else. Obviously, you don't need to design for people, but what I find, look, in any, even just keeping it defined to operational areas of an organization, we do design for other people. The system that we want to implement is for other people. The process is being done by other people or ourselves. So to me, that distinction of being a designer can be transferred for people who, like you say, might be in HR, might be designing a process for something, or might be in what you would think is a non-designer type role. You need to consider the people other than yourself, other than non-human factors, whether that's budget, whether that's timelines, whether there's something else. Design is inherently a human-to-human process.
What are some key tips that people can do to just start down that path that might make them more successful in that application?
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess there's two main ones. And I'll just focus on those. It's great to understand the principles of design and how they work, particularly in a given space. But just as important, and sometimes even more so, is the understanding of the context surrounding it. So I guess one of the areas that I have chosen to follow down has been actually looking at all aspects or wider aspects of how design might be consumed and implemented across different areas and different systems. So having a wider interest in how that design gets, or the context in which that design gets placed, if that's in an organization, who and where it's for, the sort of environment that it sits in, the technology involved, all of those things become almost more important because you have to understand them in order to implement. So it isn't just about creating a fanciful world that may exist. It's about implementing something that can exist and will exist. And that means not just knowing how to design, it's knowing all of the aspects that will get you to that end result. So I think that's the first one. And for me, The second one is largely around being ready to make some mistakes, and in some cases quite painful and even career redefining mistakes. And that comes from chasing down paths that don't work. It comes from learning more about something than maybe you needed, but you kind of need to go down that direction and resolve it and see where that leads you. That can be great, and sometimes that can be really painful, like I said. But over and above all of that, it's being prepared to accept and embrace change. And that is usually the hardest thing for people to do. But I think if there's anything, those two things are probably a good starting point.
That is a really good opportunity to jump into the meat of it, right? The real issues. And we opened up the session when you talk about you being a problem solver at heart, right? So let's talk about some problems.
Nice.
What are the operational challenges that are stopping this kind of approach and mindset from manifesting inside of companies today?
I've got a couple of thoughts on that, and it kind of, they might seem a bit esoteric, but I think they all have a common theme around, again, how organizations both stifle and support that individuality. I'll call it individuality, but it's really that creativity and innovation and the ability to approach things from a different perspective and then offer something of value that can elevate past the ability to just refine. And I think that's where I think I do my most valuable stuff, is looking at where those big leaps can happen. But if I just start with 3, we can continue the conversation from there. So for me, one of the biggest things is distributed teams, right? And a lot of this has come out since the pandemic or during the pandemic. Clearly, working distributed can work, but how do you continue to have and retain a common understanding when teams have far less in-person interaction? So to me, that is a present challenge, but it's also something that's going to just become more and more prevalent, particularly in high skill areas where there might be less availability of different people, and those teams continue to remain distributed. How do you keep people together and harness groups of teams and their value? And one of our former colleagues talks a lot about this, Gianni Giacomelli. He is all about collective intelligence, and in his view, how teams combine their skills and their knowledge to create something greater and to create that synergy. And I think, to me, that's, again, one of the big challenges. I guess the second one to that is, and I kind of referenced it before, is the nature and value of work. What is work really? Because, and again, this is, again, a pandemic discovery. There's a bit of meaninglessness in sitting at a desk for a fixed period of time. And a lot more people have discovered that the reality of that, if they hadn't discovered it already. And that kind of opens up a whole bundle of questions around the value of organizations, the value of management. Where does trust and personal accountability sit within this space? Because when you've got people who you never see, how do you know what they're doing? And are they driving value for the organization? And it becomes far less about what they're doing at a given point, but are they delivering, and this I'm saying they, but people in the organization, are they providing value in a meaningful or measurable way that may not just be in the time? And there's a long history of buying people, paying them for their time. But that's a big question to me as well. How do you define value and the value of work in a time when work could be, well, actually, the most important thing I do takes 1 minute every week, but that 1 minute keeps the lights on for 500,000 people. Is it for the minute that you paid, or is it for that value that you're paid? And that's always been there, and that's largely something that has been in the realm of the entrepreneur or someone who's more of on the capital end of things. But that shift is going to come in terms of that. And my question is, are organizations ready for that and structured in a way that can facilitate that and support that? So that's, I guess, challenge number 2. And I suppose number 3, as a bit more future facing, but I certainly see it now, is that as organizations, and it's a follow on, I suppose, from the first 2, is how do we value people? And are we valuing them in a way that allows us to continue to retain our humanity and using that in the best efforts of whatever an organization desires to do? Or are we looking to squeeze people out? And I kind of said before, organizations can sometimes be antagonistic to the individual and the sort of individual human. But at some point we very much, particularly with all sorts of aspects of emerging technology, we may not need humans for much of anything. There are certainly things that you need arms and legs and people to do, but quite often, and particularly more so, we're finding that those higher order things that we would usually task humans to do, we can get a machine to do it. So at what point do we decide to either use or continue to follow down a path of automation where we require fewer people, will make far more money, but where's that balance and how are we going to find that? And look, that's a big concept, but to bring that back to, I guess, people within businesses now and organizations now, are we constantly looking to refine and automate everything and make it as efficient as possible? Or are we looking to augment humanity and build a basis of having people do great work with a support of something, while retaining that element of humanity in organizations as well? So anyway, that's a big, like I said, it's a big idea. And I see it every day where people are choosing to use a system, totally fine. But where do you draw the line when you have an entirely automated business? What does that really mean for a broader organization when every business is that way? So it's a big question that still needs an answer, but something that I think about because I'm starting to see those challenges really brought into focus and reality right now.
Yeah, definitely. And just on that number 3 that you're just talking about, right, about the valuing people. Actually, I really like what you're saying there about augmenting humanity. And if my brain can't help it, I'm trying to cut things down into something that, the smallest little chunk that I can make sense of, especially in a work environment. But we're augmenting humanity, but you could sort of, at least in my mind, cut that down to, okay, we can augment Scott in his role, and we can automate, and we should be looking to take all the unnecessary overhead away from Tim and Sally and Sudesh and whoever else, right? We should be looking to take all that crap off their plate, because it's not doing us any good as an organization to pay them to clock in at 9 and clock out at 5 and only take 45 minutes for their lunch and make sure their coffee breaks aren't too long. I think that would motivate a lot of people, maybe to either be happier in the role they're in or move into something new where they realize that maybe the reliance on the technical skill isn't what it once was. What they're now looking for is for me to come in and think differently. And it doesn't matter what I used to think about it in healthcare, and now I'm thinking about it in a bank. So what? I'm still thinking about solving creative problems in this kind of space.
Yeah.
And it might open it up for people a little bit.
I agree with that. I find, though, that those thinking skills and the ability to really approach things from that perspective is so undervalued and probably not practiced as often as it should be. And I've been writing a book for what seems like a million years, and it's changed a few different times around this. But what I'm finding is that there are, when organizations give people the ability and scope to use their humanity in their role, and again, I'm kind of co-opting that term to talk about things like innovation and creativity, where there are elements of who we are as a species, and as we provide something that can't be replicated in any other way. And it requires us to have certain skills and certain abilities in order for us to face the future.
All right, Ray. Look, you're COO of Hello Human. You sort of thinker in chief at the Changeable Co, and you've got the Changeable Podcast, and you're going to be writing a book, and you're going to tell us all how to do infinite roadmaps. You got a lot on your plate. I'd love to hear just what exciting things are coming up for you in the future that you would want to share with our guests.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just on the podcast that's launching shortly, so I'm pretty excited about that. We've got a few
fantastic
interviews in the can already, and that's really, that kind of feeds into this mindset. But the conceit of it is largely the ideas that shape the future. And I'm talking with a bunch of different people, and obviously one of them, around what are those ideas and from what perspective my guests might be coming from in order to view these things. So I've got experts in organizations and operations. I've got people who are in startup spaces, in technology spaces, in different modalities of thinking. So and different disciplines. So I'm really keen to uncover, what sustainability means for us, or what artificial intelligence might be. So all of those things are part of that.
Yeah. And
with Hello Human, where what we do is we help organizations innovate by being a creative arm to drive their ideas out into the market faster. So value proposition work, research, and then building technologies, tools that embody the thing that they want to create. So we play in a lot of different spaces there, but again, sustainability, artificial intelligence, big questions that I think organizations and even society, humans in general, just like the name, we want to harness, we want to understand, and we want to see what the best ways of using these tools will be, or meeting these challenges will be, so that we can ultimately have a better future. And there's lots of doom and gloom, but there's so much opportunity and possibility, and I think that's really on us to move it forward. So yeah, they're part of the exciting things that I get to do every day, and looking forward to continuing that.
All right, look, I've taken up a huge chunk of your Saturday morning, man.
Really appreciate the time. It's always good to have a talk, and hopefully people find it useful and valuable to think on some of these ideas.
Absolutely. Look, you can links to the Changeable Co will be available in the show notes, and absolutely make sure to check out Rei's podcast, The Changeable, when it launches, wherever you listen to your favorite shows. But again, thank you so much, Rei, for being this week's Ops Innovator. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Scott.
Ops Innovator is produced in Sydney, Australia by 10% Labs. Our purpose is to engage thought leaders from all backgrounds, industries, and professions to explore what it takes to be truly innovative in how people and organizations work. From operating models and organizational structures, through policy and process to ways of thinking and working, it's about doing things differently and bringing the future forward to make things better now. The opinions shared by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent those of any organizations with whom they may be associated. If you would like to join the conversation as a future guest, or if you'd like to spotlight your startup that is focused on improving how organizations work, visit us at 10percentlabs.com. Until next time, this is Scott Williams encouraging you to keep looking for ways to do things differently so you can do them better.